The battlefield was a harsh place where no one was spared from its cruelty. It was a place where soldiers, human and alien alike, fought for survival, each side believing they were fighting for a righteous cause. The air smelled of smoke and blood, and the ground beneath was scarred with the remains of war. Amidst the chaos, a single figure moved through the ruins of the battlefield, focused and determined. Dr. Ethan Carter, a Warfield doctor, had seen countless wounds and injuries in his years of service, but the scenes of destruction never became easier to stomach. His job wasn't to judge the reasons behind the fight. His role was clear: save lives, no matter who they were or what side they fought for. Today, however, felt different. As Ethan moved swiftly through the debris, his medical kit clutched tightly in his hands. The air felt heavier, more oppressive. The ground shook beneath him as distant explosions echoed through the valley. Yet, his focus remained undeterred. There were people to save, and that was all that mattered. As he approached the command tent, an urgent shout pierced the noise of the battlefield. "Dr. Carter, we've got a priority case, an important one. You're needed immediately." The voice came from a young medic, out of breath from running. Ethan nodded sharply, stepping forward. "Lead the way." The medic led him through a maze of overturned vehicles and craters, finally stopping at a makeshift triage area. The scene before him took Ethan by surprise. Lying in the center of the tent was an alien queen, her regal features twisted in pain, her blood a strange green hue, staining the earth beneath her. She was surrounded by armed guards, their weapons aimed at anyone who might pose a threat. Her people, the Tsar, were known for their power and fearsome reputation across the galaxy, but now she was vulnerable, her life hanging by a thread. Ethan's eyes narrowed. This was no ordinary patient. "What happened?" he asked, quickly kneeling beside her. "We were ambushed." "The Queen was hit during the skirmish," one of the guards replied, his voice shaky. "She's critical. We need your help." Ethan didn't respond. He was already at work carefully assessing her injuries. She had several deep wounds, her abdomen pierced by what appeared to be a human-made projectile. It wasn't just any injury, it was a fatal wound, one that would kill most beings in mere minutes. But there was something different about her. Despite her condition, there was a strange calmness in her features, as though she wasn't fully aware of the danger. Ethan's hands moved with practiced precision. His mind focused on the task at hand. He began to remove the foreign objects lodged in her side, applying pressure to stop the bleeding. Her eyes flickered open for a brief moment, and that's when she looked at him. Her eyes locked with his, deep, almost otherworldly. They were a piercing violet, glowing faintly in the dim light of the tent. For a moment, everything seemed to stop. Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. There was something about her gaze that unsettled him, but he pushed the feeling aside. This wasn't the time for distractions. He continued working, cutting away the shredded fabric of her clothing to expose more of the wound. Her breath was shallow, each gasp a struggle for survival. He could feel the weight of the moment, the significance of what he was doing. But there was something in the back of his mind that nagged at him. The way she looked at him as if she knew him, or perhaps had seen him before. He shook the thought away, focusing entirely on saving her life. As he worked, he spoke softly to her, his voice calm and steady. "Stay with me. I can save you." "Just hold on." The Queen's eyes fluttered again and she opened her mouth. Though no words came out, it was then that Ethan noticed something even stranger. Her lips moved, forming a name. His name. Ethan. His hands froze mid-motion, a strange sensation sweeping over him. His name. It was barely a whisper, but it felt heavy with meaning. He didn't understand why, but her voice sent a shiver through him. She was not just any alien queen. There was something more, something personal, behind that name, something that he couldn't yet comprehend. Ethan pushed the thought aside. He couldn't afford distractions, not now. He had to save her. With renewed determination, he worked faster, using every bit of medical knowledge he had to stabilize her. Minutes felt like hours, but finally he managed to stop the bleeding, securing the wound as best as he could. The Queen's body was still, but there was a steady rhythm to her breath now. She wasn't out of danger, but she had a fighting chance. Exhausted, Ethan stepped back, wiping the sweat from his brow. He looked at the Queen, still lying unconscious, and wondered about the strange connection he felt. It was as if a part of him had recognized her, even though they had never met before. Her reaction to his name had been too intense, too personal. "Is she going to make it?" one of the guards asked, his voice filled with apprehension. Ethan took a deep breath and nodded. "She'll survive, but we need to keep her stable. She's not out of the woods yet." As he spoke, he felt the weight of the moment settling in. There was more to this encounter than just saving a life. There was a deeper story at play, one that would unfold in time. But for now, all he could do was wait. The battle outside raged on, but for Ethan, the real fight was just beginning. Hours had passed since the battle's chaos had quieted, leaving only the heavy silence that followed the horrors of war. The medical tent where Dr. Bear, Ethan Carter, worked now felt like a distant world away from the front lines, isolated and calm, though not without its own tension. The Queen's condition had stabilized, but she was still unconscious, lying motionless on the makeshift medical bed. Her features remained eerily serene, though her alien blood had stained the sheets beneath her, and her breath was slow but steady. Ethan sat by her side, his gaze never straying far from the patient. His mind was racing, torn between the instinct to keep her alive and the lingering questions about her reaction to his name. The way her eyes had locked onto his, as if she had seen a ghost. He couldn't shake the feeling that he knew her from somewhere. But where? He couldn't remember. His hand instinctively reached for the medical kit beside him, though he had already done all he could for her injuries. He applied a small amount of antiseptic to his hands, then rubbed them together, as if the motion would steady his thoughts. It didn't work. He glanced at her again, this time focusing on the strange markings on her skin, almost like tattoos, running down her arm in elegant swirls. It was something he hadn't noticed earlier, and it added to the mystery of her identity. These weren't just any markings. They were ancient, familiar, though he couldn't place where he'd seen them before. A soft groan came from the Queen, and Ethan's heart skipped a beat. Her eyes flickered open, and she blinked several times as if trying to adjust to the light in the room. For a brief moment, Ethan thought she might not remember him, or perhaps she'd never known him at all. But then, as her gaze slowly shifted toward him, he saw that same recognition in her eyes. Her pupils widened, her mouth slightly parted, as though she had been searching for something in the shadows, and now she had found it. "You!" Her voice was weak, barely a whisper, but it was unmistakable. She spoke his name with an air of disbelief, as though the very sound of it was too much for her to comprehend.
Ethan, swallowed, his throat suddenly dry.
He had been expecting her to speak again, but not like this. Not with the kind of recognition that made his heart race. He leaned in closer, his brow furrowing as he searched her face.
"You know me?" The Queen nodded slowly, her hand rising weakly to her chest, as though the effort itself required immense strength.
I've known you for longer than you think," she replied, her voice still fragile but laced with a deep sadness that echoed in her words. "I don't understand. How can it be? You." After all these years, Ethan could hardly believe what he was hearing.
"What do you mean? I've never seen you before."
"I'm just a field doctor. A human doctor."
Her eyes shimmered with a mixture of confusion and something else, something far more profound. She struggled to sit up, her breathing shallow, but the effort was enough to make her wince. You're not just a doctor, Ethan. You're someone I've been waiting for. He stared at her, unable to fully grasp the weight of her words. What are you talking about? Waiting for me? His voice was thick with confusion, his heart pounding faster in his chest. I don't even know who you are. The Queen's lips parted as though she were about to say something, but she paused, her eyes clouding over for a moment. She shook her head slowly, as if trying to clear away the fog that had settled in her mind. This is all wrong, she whispered, her voice barely audible. This isn't the way it was supposed to happen. I've seen you before. In visions, in dreams. I knew this day would come, but I never imagined it would be like this. Ethan couldn't make sense of her words. His mind raced to understand, to connect the dots, but nothing seemed to fit. You've seen me in your dreams? In visions? He repeated, still uncertain whether he should believe her or dismiss it, as the ramblings of someone delirious from their wounds. She nodded again, though this time her gaze drifted to something distant, as though she were lost in her own memories. Yes, I saw you in my dreams, Ethan, long before you even knew my name, long before you were born. My people, we've had a prophecy, a tale that has been passed down through the generations. A human, one from your bloodline, who would come to us when we were at our most desperate. You would be the one to change everything. Ethan's head spun. He couldn't begin to understand what she was saying. A prophecy? His bloodline? It sounded impossible, absurd even, but the way she spoke, the certainty in her voice, made it hard to dismiss entirely. Look, Ethan said, trying to regain some semblance of control over the conversation. I'm not sure what kind of prophecy you're talking about, but I'm just here to do my job.
I'm a doctor. That's it.
I don't know, she interrupted, her voice firm despite her weakness. You don't understand. This isn't a coincidence. Everything that has happened, everything that led you here, it was all meant to be. She looked at him with such intensity that Ethan felt as though he were being drawn into the depths of her very soul. You have a part to play, whether you believe it or not. And I need you, Ethan. I need you to help me. Help us! The weight of her words hung heavily in the air, and for a moment, Ethan didn't know how to respond. He had always believed that the line between the human and alien worlds was too vast to ever be bridged, that there was no way someone like him, a simple doctor, could have any meaningful role to play in the grand scheme of things. But now, standing in front of him, was an alien queen who seemed to believe the exact opposite. I don't know what you're asking me to do, Ethan said, his voice shaking slightly. I don't even know what's happening. Why me? Why my bloodline? The Queen's eyes softened as she reached out, her hand trembling slightly as it rested on his. Because you are the one destined to save us. You are the one who can end this war. You are the one who can heal what has been broken. Ethan pulled his hand back, his mind swirling with uncertainty. He couldn't make sense of what she was saying. Nothing made sense. But one thing was clear. His life was no longer his own. He had been pulled into something much larger than himself, and now, whether he wanted to or not, he was part of it. What do you need me to do? He asked, his voice steady but filled with doubt. The Queen's expression softened as she took a deep breath, her chest rising and falling slowly. I need you to help me rebuild, to heal not just my wounds, but the wounds of my people, the wounds of a civilization on the brink of destruction. Together, we can end this war. Together, we can change the future. Ethan felt the weight of her words, the responsibility pressing down on him. For the first time in his life, he realized that he was standing at the crossroads of something unimaginable, something that could alter the course of history. And whether he was ready for it or not, there was no turning back now. Ethan's mind raced, his thoughts spinning with the Queen's words, the war, her people, the prophecy. He couldn't begin to understand it all. For most of his life, he had been content to be a doctor, someone who helped others without getting involved in the complexities of politics or war. But now, he had found himself at the center of something far bigger than he had ever imagined. The fate of entire civilizations seemed to rest in his hands, and he didn't know whether to feel honored or terrified. As he sat there, lost in thought, the Queen's words echoed in his mind. She had told him that he had a role to play, that his bloodline was tied to an ancient prophecy. She had looked at him with such certainty, with such intensity, as if she truly believed he was the one who could end the war. But how could he, a mere doctor, possibly have the power to change the course of history? The sound of footsteps approaching pulled Ethan from his thoughts. He looked up to see one of the Queen's guards entering the tent. The man's face was grim, and his eyes were filled with worry. "Dr. Carter," the guard said, his voice low, "the Queen's enemies are closing in. We've received reports that they're planning an assault on this location. We need to move her. Now." Ethan's heart skipped a beat. Bah. The Queen's enemies had already shown their ruthless nature during the ambush, and now they were coming for her again. He had barely managed to stabilize her, and now she was in danger once more. The thought of moving her, of putting her in harm's way again, filled him with dread. "I can't move her yet," Ethan said quickly, standing up. "She's still weak. If we tried to move her now, she could—" "I understand, Doctor." "Carter!" the guard interrupted, his voice filled with urgency. "But if we stay here, they will find us. We don't have the luxury of time. The Queen's survival is our top priority." Ethan stared at the guard, torn between his duty as a doctor and the pressing need to protect the Queen. He had to admit the guard's words made sense. If they stayed in one place, they would be sitting ducks for the enemy. But at the same time, moving her could put her life in even more danger. "Give me a moment," Ethan said, his voice strained as he turned back to the Queen. He knelt beside her, his hands gently resting on her shoulder. She had fallen into a deep sleep after their conversation, her breathing slow and even. "Queen Alex," he whispered, her name slipping from his lips as though it was something he had known forever. He had learned her name only moments ago, but it already felt as if it had always been a part of him. "You need to wake up. I'm going to move you." Her eyes fluttered open and she looked at him, her violet gaze soft but filled with a quiet strength. "Ethan," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I'm not ready for what's coming." "We don't have a choice," Ethan replied gently. "Your enemies are coming. We have to leave." She nodded, her expression one of reluctant understanding. "I know. But be careful. They are not what they seem." Ethan frowned, unsure of what she meant, but there was no time to ask. The guard had already started gathering the supplies, preparing to move the Queen. With a deep breath, Ethan helped her to sit up, supporting her with his arm. The effort was taxing, but she managed to stay conscious, her eyes focused and alert despite the weakness in her body. "Are you ready?" Ethan asked, his voice steady, though his heart was racing. "I am ready," the Queen replied softly, her voice surprisingly strong despite her condition. "I've been waiting for this moment for a long time." The guard returned with the stretcher, and together, they carefully lifted the Queen onto it. As they made their way out of the tent, Ethan felt a surge of unease. The atmosphere had changed. The air felt thicker, the silence heavier. They were not alone. The enemy was drawing closer. "Keep moving," the guard urged, his voice sharp. "We need to reach the transport zone." "We don't have much time." Ethan nodded, but his thoughts were clouded with doubt. The Queen had said that her enemies were not what they seemed. But what did that mean? Who were they really? He had seen the brutality of the Tsar forces, but there was something about the Queen's warning that made him uneasy. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this conflict than he had been told. As they moved through the winding corridors of the camp, Ethan couldn't help but notice the heightened security. Soldiers and medics rushed past them, their faces tense with fear and anticipation. Everyone was preparing for the worst. Finally, they reached the transport zone, a small, fortified area where the Queen's personal ship awaited. The ship, sleek and advanced, was designed for rapid escape and concealment, but even it could not guarantee safety in the face of the approaching enemy forces. Ethan could hear the distant sounds of footsteps, the shuffling of boots and armor, as the soldiers closed in. "We have to hurry," Bedard said urgently. "They're almost here." Ethan nodded, his mind focused on the task at hand. He couldn't let the Queen die, not now, not after everything they had been through. They loaded her into the ship as quickly as possible, and once she was safely secured, Ethan followed close behind, his heart pounding in his chest. As the ship's engines roared to life, Ethan could feel the tension in the air. The ship began to lift off, its sleek body cutting through the darkness of the night sky. The enemy forces were still miles away, but Ethan knew it was only a matter of time before they caught up. They had to get out of there, fast. The Queen was quiet, her eyes closed as she rested, but Ethan could see the strain in her features. She was fighting to stay awake, to remain alert, but the effort was wearing her down. She had been through so much, and Ethan couldn't help but wonder how much more she could take. "We'll be safe soon," Ethan said softly, his voice a comforting promise. But even as he said the words, he knew they weren't true. The danger wasn't over. In fact, it was just beginning. The ship hummed steadily as it cut through the dark expanse of space. Ethan stood at the helm, watching the stars streak past the window, his mind racing. The Queen lay unconscious on a bed in the back of the ship, surrounded by her most trusted guards. The air felt heavy, thick with unspoken tension. Even though they were in motion, safe for now, it was clear that their troubles were far from over. Ethan couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had settled deep in his chest. The Queen had warned him about the danger they were facing, but he hadn't fully understood the weight of her words. Who were these enemies, really? What did they want from her? From him? The ship's crew, a mix of soldiers and medics, moved with purpose, their faces hardened by the urgency of their situation. They were prepared for the worst. As the Queen's personal physician, Ethan had seen many battlefields, but nothing about this felt familiar. This was different. This wasn't just a war between soldiers. This was something more, something ancient. A soft beep interrupted Ethan's thoughts. He glanced at the communication panel. The message was from the Queen's second-in-command, a woman named Lyra. Ethan had met her briefly before the ambush. She was cold, efficient, and fiercely loyal to the Queen, but she wasn't the one he wanted to speak with right now. Still, duty called. He pressed a button, and Lyra's face appeared on the screen. Her sharp features were set in a serious expression, her eyes flashing with determination. "Dr. Carter," Lyra's voice was clipped. "The Queen is stable for now, but we have a situation. We've intercepted communication from the enemy. They know our location. They're closing in fast." Ethan's stomach tightened. He glanced over his shoulder at the Queen, still unconscious. What kind of enemy are we talking about? Lyra's eyes darkened. It's not just a simple military force.
They're part of a faction within the Tsar Empire.
A faction that's believed to have been wiped out long ago. They are the ones who betrayed the Queen's family, the ones responsible for the war in the first place. They've come to finish what they started. Ethan's mind struggled to process her words. A faction within the Tsar Empire? He knew the Tsar were an ancient race, powerful and unforgiving, but he hadn't realized there were factions even within their own empire. The Queen had spoken of prophecies, of destinies tied to his bloodline. But this was something he never could have imagined. "Why are they after the Queen?" Ethan asked, his voice low. "They believe she's the last living heir to the true throne of the Tsar. Her bloodline holds the key to the Empire's power." If they kill her, they can claim the throne for themselves and erase the legacy of her family. It's not just about control. It's about erasing the past. Ethan felt the weight of Lyra's words. The Queen wasn't just a leader. She was a symbol, a living embodiment of the Tsar's history and future. And now, there were those who would stop at nothing to destroy that. He had seen the horrors of war before, but this felt different. This wasn't just a fight for land or resources. It was a fight for something far more powerful. Legacy. We can't let them reach us, Ethan said, a new determination filling his voice. I agree, Lyra replied. We've set a course for a remote location in the outer sector, but the enemy will catch up to us before we get there. We'll have to make a stand. Ethan clenched his fists. He wasn't a soldier. He wasn't a warrior. But the Queen's survival and the survival of the people she represented depended on them. Now, he had no choice but to fight. Understood, Ethan said, his voice firm. I'll prepare the Queen for the worst. Lyra nodded. Good.
We'll be ready, but be aware. These aren't just ordinary soldiers.
They have a weapon, something that can disrupt our technology. We might lose communication or even power before we reach the safe zone. We need to move fast. Ethan's heart raced. This wasn't just about protecting the Queen anymore. It was about survival, his, hers, and everyone else on this ship. The stakes had just been raised, and he didn't know if they were going to make it out alive. He cut the communication and turned to the rest of the crew, who were already preparing for the upcoming battle. Weapons were being checked, medical supplies gathered, and plans were being made. Ethan's role was clear. As a doctor, his primary responsibility was to save lives, but in a situation like this, he would have to do more. He would have to fight, even if it was just to protect the people who had come to rely on him. He moved quickly to the Queen's quarters, where Lyra and a few other guards were already tending to her. The Queen's face was pale, her body still weak from the injuries she had sustained. But despite the exhaustion, there was a strength in her eyes, a fire that refused to be extinguished. Ethan sat beside her, his hand resting gently on hers. We're going to be okay, he said, his voice more for his own reassurance than hers. The Queen's eyes fluttered open, and she looked at him, her violet gaze filled with an understanding that cut through the fear and uncertainty in his heart. You don't have to fight this battle alone, she said softly, her voice stronger now. We fight together. We always have. Ethan nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. He had come here to save lives, but now he was part of something much bigger than he had ever anticipated. His fate was tied to hers, and there was no turning back. As the ship continued its course through the stars, Ethan couldn't help but feel a strange sense of purpose filling him. The Queen was more than just a patient. She was the key to a future that neither of them fully understood. The prophecy had led them here, and now they would face whatever came next, together. A sudden jolt shook the ship, pulling Ethan from his thoughts. The ship's alarms blared and the lights flickered. They had made contact with the enemy. Brace yourselves! Lyra's voice crackled over the intercom. This is it. Ethan stood, his heart pounding in his chest. The ship was under attack, and there was no telling what would happen next. But one thing was certain. They would fight. They would fight to survive. And together they would face the future, whatever it held.